So, students, today we are going to read and understand the poem Childhood, written by Marcus Nathan. He is a modern poet and he uses simple and exact words in an ironic perspective. And in the poem Childhood, we see the poet's curiosity to know when actually an individual ceases to be a child. He wonders whether it is the age or the stage when the young mind learns to see through the adult's hypocrisy and identifies his own distinctiveness. Childhood disappears to hide itself in an infant's innocent expression. So here we find the poet obsessed with the loss of his childhood. He wants to know when he has lost his childhood. Thus, he talks about the process of growing from a child to an adolescent and then to an adult. It is an impalpable one. We hardly see the process of growing. However, one fine day, one realizes that one has left behind the childhood innocence, and has stepped into the world of adolescence and adulthood. There is no line of demarcation between the various stages. Thus, the poet wonders whether it is a span of years or process of losing innocence and outgrowing the gullibility, seeing through the hypocrisy of the world, or the craftiness or acquiring an individuality which actually uh, stops childhood, which actually spells the stop of the childhood. So, somewhat satisfied with his analysis, then we find that poet takes up the next question as to where his childhood has disappeared. And thus, he also concludes, he is quite suggestive in the ending lines of the poem, that childhood resides in an infant's face. That is, childhood is the abode of innocence. The moment one loses innocence, one ceases to be a child. So we find the here poet obsessed with the loss of his childhood, the childhood innocence, and that's why he has penned down this wonderful poem where he actually concludes by giving a wonderful message that one can always find his childhood in the face of an on the face of an infant. So let's read this poem and understand it stanza wise. When did my childhood go? Was it the day I ceased to be 11? Now, here the poet, he is actually talking about the growth in terms of year. So he asks the question when he actually lost his childhood. And in his speculation, he tries to find his own answers that was it the day when he ceased to be 11? That means when we grow, we gradually move towards adulthood. So when he was growing and when he crossed the age of 11, then was that the day that he lost his childhood innocence? So, in his speculations, we find the questions made by the poet and answers also. And we see that how he says that, was it the day that I ceased to be 11? So, talking about the growth in terms of years, he says that when I turned into 12, then was that the day that I lost my childhood innocence? Further, he adds, was it the time I realized that hell and heaven could not be found in geography? Hell and heaven, these are imaginary places, imaginary concepts. So the poet says that was it the time when one realizes that these hell and heaven are imaginary things, they are not reality, and as they could not be found in the books of geography and therefore could not be, so he says that therefore they don't exist in the real world, and thus was that the day? So he wonders in this line that was that the day when he developed the ability to think rationally, when he was able to distinguish between the truth and the imagination, reality or the fiction. Thus, that he says that was that the day that he realized that he has lost his childhood. So, in this stanza, he talks about the development of rational thinking in an individual. So he says that was that the day when he realized that hell and heaven are imaginary things and they don't exist in reality, and therefore they could not be found in the books of geography, because whatever the things they exist in the world, you can locate it on the map, you can locate it, find it in the books of geography. So if you cannot locate it, that means it does not exist. So the poet says that was that the day that he lost his childhood. Then in the second stanza, he says, when did my childhood go? The question continues. Was it the time I realized that adults were not all they seemed to be? They talked of love and preached of love, but did not act so lovingly. Was that the day? So, poet says that when he developed the ability to see through the hypocrisy of the world, that how the grown ups they were not as good as they appeared to be, nor did they practice what they preached to others. So he says that gradually, when he developed this art of understanding the hypocrisy of the world, he moved towards the adulthood. So was that the day that he could see that how people, what they say, they never follow in their life. They talk of brotherhood, they talk of love, they talk of peace, but they never practice such things in their life. So they did not act so lovingly. So he says that was that the day when he moved a step towards adulthood that he lost his childhood. So when he could clearly see the hypocrisy of the world. Hypocrisy means when what you say, you don't follow it yourself. In the third stanza, the poet says, when did my childhood go? Was it when I found my mind was really mine to use whichever way I choose, producing thoughts that were not those of other people, but my own and mine alone? Was that the day? So the poet now says in the third stanza that there comes a stage when one develops the art of independent thinking. That means you realize your individuality. You come to know that your mind is your own. You are capable of taking your own decisions, and your thoughts, those thoughts are not influenced by other people, and those thoughts are purely your own thoughts, purely your alone. So he says that when one is able to understand his individuality and his thoughts are not influenced or directed by others, then was that the day that a person, or is it the day that a person loses his childhood? So, in the third stanza, the poet here talks about understanding the individuality. So, when you realize that your mind is completely your own, you are capable of taking your independent decisions, and your thoughts are not influenced by others, that means again you move towards adulthood. Now, in the concluding stanza, that is the fourth stanza, we see a shift in time, shift from time to place. And we find the poet to be little sensitive and suggestive too, because he is very thoughtful here. So he tries to answer the questions that he had speculated here, and he also tells the readers the solution to the question in a very simple but in a deep manner. He tells that where did my childhood go? It went to some forgotten place that's hidden in an infant's face. That is all I know. So, poet here talks about his journey from when to where. Now, when he was able to find answers to his question about when he lost his childhood, he then tries to find that actually where did the childhood go? And he says that it went to some forgotten place. So, in the final stanza, we see how the poet comes out with an answer. He says that the childhood is perhaps lying hidden at a place which is long forgotten. Childhood, it still lies in us, but we have forgotten that childhood. And he says that in the concluding lines, the glimpse of the lost childhood can be seen over the infant's face, and you can easily see an infant and you can find that childhood innocence back again. So, students, if you remember, just take an example that whenever you play with little children, how you become like them. You just try to act like them, you try to speak like them. And what is this? This is all that you find your childhood back here. So, we find the poet answering in the concluding line that we can always find our childhood. We can recollect all those things which are faded, and he also adds here, when he is talking about some forgotten place, that why we have forgotten our childhood. He says that the way we are lost in the ways of the world, the way we are busy in the world, we hardly remember our childhood. So we are caught in the ways of the world. We are busy with our life, examination, job, so that way we are just lost in the ways of the world. We are so completely absorbed in earning livelihood and thinking about our future that we don't realize that where the childhood has gone. And thus we find the poet how he gives an answer to the readers that the lost childhood, the glimpse of the lost childhood can always be seen or found in the face of an infant. So when you look at a child, a young child, little child, you can always recollect the childhood innocence. And this is where the poem ends. Thus, we see that how this poem it deals with the theme of loss of childhood because of various types of reason like physical growth, development of thought, the influence of worldly ways. So, disillusioned with the hypocritical ways of the adult world, the poet he bemoans the loss of his childhood. And thus, we find that how he ends the poem on a positive note, telling the readers an answer that they can always find their childhood innocence on an infant's face. And this is all about the poem Childhood. We will discuss the question answer, students, in the next session. Thank you all for listening.